Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Chuck Sippial has been a significant part of Texas A&M's administrative family for some 15 years as Vice President for Administration, more recently in charge of facilities where he now works for the A&M System. The story you may not know is that of Colonel Chuck Sippial, United States Air Force officer for 22 years. It was a fascinating career that included a 9-month tour at Pleiku Air Base during the Vietnam War. Also 2 tours in Europe, first at Madrid, Spain, and then later at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. He served several stateside tours where his expertise and education as a civil engineer paved a path to both his military and civilian careers. Colonel Charles A. Chuck Sippial, Sr. is our guest today on Veterans of the Valley. Chuck, it's an honor to have you, honor to finally have you here. I've wanted to have you on the show for a long time. Let's go back to when you were born in Montgomery, Alabama in 1944. You and your family, your siblings, 11 of you, and mom and dad, you lived a little bit outside of Montgomery on a farm. You grew food and sort of talk about growing up at that time in Montgomery, Alabama.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, Tom. I've been waiting to come on the show. I think this is a it's an excellent show.
Thank you.
I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, as you've just stated. We lived out in what we refer to as the country back in those days, 7 miles out of the city. We had an 18-acre farm that we grew vegetables and corn and all kinds of things for the family to exist on. We also had cows and pigs, and we had a horse that we used to work the farm. And when we were old enough to go out and work in the garden, that's what we would be assigned to do.
Right.
We were old enough to feed the chickens in the morning and the hogs in the evening when we came from school. That's what we did, and we did that until age 11. And at age 11, Dad then would take us out with him to learn how to become electricians. He would have us. We were kind of the guys who did all the hard work, all the dirty work, crawling underneath houses in the attics and stringing wires and stuff. And that continued until we were age 16 and we're old enough to get our driver's license. And then he started developing us to be crew leaders working for him and having a crew of 2 or 3 and wiring houses. We wired thousands and thousands of houses over our careers working for Dad, and we worked for Dad until we were able to go to college. But Dad was pretty smart because he sent us to college either in Montgomery or in Tuskegee, which is 30 minutes away.
Right.
So in either case, when we were not in class, we were working with the business. Dad was a very successful contractor in that he was able to send all 11 of us to college.
Wow.
And most of us stayed in Dad's career area in construction. A couple like my older brother and myself who ventured out. Dad's response was, you can do whatever you want to do after you become a journeyman electrician. And at age 18, all the boys were journeyman electricians, and all the girls worked in the office and became office administrative people. So
that's a fascinating story because you said that your dad was one of the first, if not the first, African-American electricians in the state of Alabama.
Yes, he was.
And rewind a little bit to your pre-college schooling. You went to a 3-room schoolhouse.
Yes.
3 teachers. And what you were taught to read and write, and as you stated to me earlier, pretty much just how to survive in the African-American community, right?
Well, that is correct. Our school in our neighborhood was as you indicate, a 3-room school, and 3 teachers, including the principal. Each teacher had 2 grades. A lot of times the teachers spent a lot of time trying to keep control of the class. I was one of the bad guys, I hate to say it, but I was. But it was one of the schools that did teach you how to read and write and to exist in the African American community, because the whole system was based on you staying in Montgomery, living in that community, and being able to find a job of some sort. And as I said, my father's desire was that we become electricians, because his thought was that people will always need lights.
Right.
And as long as they need lights, they need electricians. And so you would always be able to take care of yourself.
Exactly. You, there were 11 of you. Like you said, all 11 of you went to college. 8 of you graduated. Some went to Alabama State. Others, like yourself, went to Tuskegee University. As we were discussing just a moment ago, of course, the home of the very famous World War II squadron, the Tuskegee Airmen. You graduated in May of '67. You were married in June. You went into the Air Force in July, and you were sent off to Madrid, Spain, from Tuskegee, Alabama to Madrid, Spain. That was quite a culture shock.
What an experience.
Yeah.
What an experience. 2 people who barely had ever left the state of Alabama graduated from college and find themselves in a few months in the middle of downtown Madrid, Spain, in a penthouse apartment, no Spanish capability, and starting out on an adventure that continued. We moved, found a place to move, to live in, and then within 11 months we had our first child, and then 18 months later we had our second child.
And when you were there, you immediately took your training as a civil engineer to work there in Spain as a civil engineering program officer. Talk about a little bit about what your duty was in Madrid.
Well, my primary duty was to program projects that the base needed to have accomplished. I was on the programming end, the starting of the end, to submit the paperwork to the headquarters for the projects to get approved. After that stint, I was then moved to the engineering side of the house, where I was able to supervise the design engineers. So from the program aspect, we went from there to the design aspect to get the projects designed and advertised and work with Spanish contractors, which was an experience in itself, not speaking very much Spanish and dealing with them and trying to get projects moved along. They were not as ambitious in moving those projects along as we were, so there was always a conversation or two with them, trying to encourage them and convince them that we needed the project today, not mañana.
You were in Madrid for 4 years. Before you ever left, though, a buddy came up to you and had a suggestion for you. Talk about what that suggestion was.
Yeah, my buddy Greg, Jim Gregg, was a single guy, very kind of wild guy. You know, we got along great. I was married, he was single. He was come and spend time at my house, spend the night. And so we got to be very good friends. And one day he suggested that we go to Vietnam and volunteer to go to Vietnam. And I said, Jim, why? He said, hey, we could go work in that Red Horse Squadron, that big heavy equipment squadron, get a lot of experience. Those guys have a lot of fun. I have a friend who's over there, and he's just having a ball. So let's go volunteer.
It was a construction unit, kind of the Air Force version of the Navy Seabees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Jim and I go trucking down to personnel and say, we want to volunteer to go to Vietnam, and we want to be in the heavy construction unit. And they said, oh yeah, we need people to do that. And so we both volunteered.
Right.
But neither one of us got into the heavy construction unit. They sent Jim to the headquarters in Saigon and sent me to Pleiku Air Base in the Central Highlands with the mountain yards and most of the Army guys at 2 Corps headquarters. So that's where I spent my time.
September of 1971, that's when you went in country. Talk more about that duty and what it involved. You were sort of in charge of the base there as far as its maintenance and sort of its operation.
That is correct. I was the operations and maintenance officer, what we refer to as the station civil engineer. I was responsible for maintaining the buildings that the Air Force used, as well as converting and turning over buildings to the Vietnamese Air Force. Part of that program for that the military had at the time was that we were turning functions over to the Vietnamese so that we could withdraw from Vietnam, and that was my job, turning those buildings over one by one in perfect shape to the South Vietnamese Air Force engineers so they could maintain them.
Right. This was not a dangerous tour, obviously, because there. Talk about that.
It had its bad points. We were on the bottom side of the hill from 2 Corps headquarters, and the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese would shoot rockets at 2 Corps headquarters, and they would miss. We would say they had that 3-level trainees up there shooting rockets at them. And they would come down in our part of that base. And I remember one morning I was at work around 6:15, and all of a sudden this big loud noise and everything happens. And after you're there for a while, there are instincts that take over. And before I know it, I was under my desk with my helmet on, with my flak jacket on. But I learned a lot from that, not to go to work that early by myself in that part of the base in the morning. So we got shot at quite a bit. And as the war progressed, and as in 72, we were being shot at every morning around 5 o'clock. They would launch about 15 or 20 rockets at us, and thank God it didn't hit the trailers where we were staying at the time.
Right.
So those were some scary moments for many of us Air Force people over there.
Among your medals and decorations that you received, the Bronze Star Medal, meritorious and the Meritorious Service Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters. Now later on in this 9-month tour, sort of your duty changed. Talk a little bit about that, how that involved as far as navigation of airplanes and such that, a little bit outside of Pleiku.
Well, when we originally were assigned to, this unit was there, we had what we refer to as a TACAN site.
Yes,
up in the tri-border area, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and South Vietnam, and we had 2 airmen who maintained this site and maintained the generators in order to provide power for the site, and it was up in the triple canopy jungle, and I would have to go up there occasionally to check on them. They stayed overnight there. We would occasionally rotate them out. But as the war progressed, we would bring them out every night, and unfortunately, the last day they were scheduled to go, there was a lot of firefighting going on up in that area. They were dropped off, but the Army crew, the helicopter crew that went up there was shot down, and all people were killed, and that was a sad day for all of us. And the Vietnamese then were moving down south and again started shooting at us on a more regular basis and a more consistent basis.
Because of the acceleration of the transfer of the base to the South Vietnamese Air Force, you got to come home from, rather than the typical 12-month tour, you got to come home 3 months early, so you spent 9 months when you did come home. I want to go to some photographs right now, and then we'll come back and talk about your post-Vietnam service, because there's a lot to talk about there. A few pictures that, when was it? This was taken in at Pleiku, is that right?
This was at Pleiku. That was our uniform for the day, and I think that was probably about half of my tour there. I was out with probably the security policeman. The security police captain there had become one of my best friends, and we would do all kinds of crazy things like patrol the perimeter at night when we thought the big con would be coming by, and just young men thinking that we could do a lot. Yeah. And so that was one of the times that we were there.
I asked you about the size of the Pleiku Air Base. You likened it a little bit to about the size of Easterwood Field in College Station, but obviously a lot more buildings. This is an aerial shot taken in 1969, so this is quite a bit the way it looked like when you were there.
It certainly was, and if you look to the top of the picture, you will see the runway. As we were pulling out and moving equipment back, one of the projects I had to do was to install a different kind of barrier system there for the Vietnamese Air Force A-1Es that would land there and take off there. And so I remember working out on that runway, and the planes coming in, some of them were shot up, and we would have to evacuate the area for a while. Then we would go back and run back over there again and try to finish our project. Yeah, that has some memories.
Move on to a few other pictures. You're about to get into a trainer, right?
Yes.
Take a flight.
This was when I was at Williams Air Force Base. My commander and I were pretty close. I was the base engineer, squadron commander, and he was the wing commander. And he would always say that as a maintenance officer, I had all the money and he couldn't get any. And so he promised me he would take me for a ride on the T-38 trainer, which he did, and he did all kind of supersonic turns and
see how quickly he could get you to throw up,
and
right?
he did, and And he laughed about it and told the whole wing about that. That Chuck Sippial threw up. The funny thing is, I hadn't eaten for a day, trying to make sure he didn't. But that was an enjoyable.
This was before the flight, and you had a smile on your face.
Yes, I did.
Right,
yes,
right.
I did.
The smile wasn't quite that big afterwards. Where's this?
This was
Later on.
later on at
right.
Williams. After we had a change of command ceremony. That was a request went out to all the lieutenant colonels to volunteer to be the officer in charge for that particular occasion. I held up my hand first, and the wing commander says, "Okay, you got it." And so I was in charge of the change of command on that particular day. That was when I was a little smaller and a lot more better shape.
Now this was, I guess, was this in Arizona also?
This was also at Williams. This was in the golf pro shop. As you see from the badge, I was also the base fire marshal there at Williams Air Force Base. But my boss also liked to play golf, and so we were then shopping, or probably meeting one of the visitors that we would have in the wintertime coming from Washington area to review the base and get a little game of golf in at the same time. So.
Right. This is post-Vietnam, which we'll be talking about here in just a little bit. And here's a couple of commendations. This is...
Yeah, I had completed by seminar the Air Command and Staff College, and I was presented my certificate by one of the colonels over at Maxwell Air Force Base there.
Okay, and then another certificate.
This is when the other gentleman and other major and I completed our Air War College by seminar, and I was really happy about that. We both were distinguished graduates of the seminar, and we're very pleased, and that was our wing commander giving us our certificates.
And finally, I think we have your official Air Force photograph there.
Yeah, that was me when I had black hair. It's all
is,
gray now.
Towards the end of your service, I
Yes,
take it.
yes,
Right
it
there.
was. I had completed the Industrial College of Armed Forces in Residence, and this was when I was being assigned to the Pentagon.
So we got a lot to talk about post-Vietnam, obviously. When you came back from Vietnam, you told me that your first plan was to get out and go back to work for your dad. But then your family got together and said, hey, we don't want to go back to Alabama. Do you not like what you're doing? And you said, sure, I like it, so you stayed in.
My 5-year-old son and, the wife and the 2 kids at the time, and I were sitting at the table, and we had about 3 or 4 weeks to go in the service. And so I was just commenting, we're getting out of the Air Force here pretty soon. And my oldest son, Anthony, said, Dad, why are we getting out? I like the Air Force. And my wife commented, yeah, I do too. So we don't want to go back to Alabama. We don't want to go back and work with their, they didn't really want me to go back and work for Dad because they'd enjoyed the traveling around, and they knew Dad was a pretty tough taskmaster as he was when we were growing up. So they suggested that we stay in.
Right.
And fortunately for me, I had been given a fantastic commander to work for. I shouldn't say I had been given. He was assigned to the base, and we hit it off really
Taylor,
well.
Right? Colonel Dan Taylor.
Colonel Dan Taylor. And Colonel Taylor and I hit it off, and I went to tell him that I really didn't want to get out. My family I really liked, and so he hand carried the paperwork through, and within 2 weeks' time, I was back in the service, headed now for a real serious career.
Right.
First
stop, Andrews Air Force Base, where you were an assistant director of construction management. And within less than a year, you were asked to be the chief of operations, still at Andrews, with 400 people under your command.
Yes, that was a tremendous assignment. I went to Colonel Taylor, and I said to Colonel Taylor, I had a crew when I was 16, and I think I know how to manage and lead people, and I like to have the opportunity to fill this position until the permanent replacement gets in. And he said, you sure you can do it? And I told him, I convinced him that I could. And so 6 months later, when the permanent person came in, he said, "You're doing such a great job, I'm going to keep you in the job." So
Yeah, and the new guy got your old job,
the
right?
new guy got my old job.
You were sent for your second tour in Europe, this time to Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. Talk about there. You were there for 8 months.
I was there after 8 months. I had gone up and volunteered to the executive officer for the civil engineer for Europe to sit in his seat if he wanted to go on leave or had something to do, and because I wanted to learn more about the Air Force in Europe. And somehow that information got communicated to the chief. And so when this individual first decided to take some leave, they asked me up, and I went up for a day or two. I think it was a day or two, and they liked me, and they liked the way I went about doing things. And so this individual received an assignment, and they asked me to come up and take the job permanently,
Right.
which was again another tough job for me because it was 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, 6 hours on Saturday. And at the same time, I was working on completing a master's degree with the University of Southern California extension program there,
Right.
and finishing up one of my military education classes that I had to take.
Right.
So it was the days that I saw the sun go down and I saw it come back up again, particularly working statistics in my master's program. That was a toughie for me.
Doing all of this, trying to tend to your family, get some sleep, do
Yes.
all of that in only 24 hours. So whatever work ethic you had not learned as a child in Alabama, you certainly learned at this period of your military service.
It was a time that I will never forget. It was a time that I would not necessarily want to do over again, but certainly I'm very appreciative for having the opportunity to do all those things at the same time and having the family stand behind me and move forward.
It's time to go back to the States, and you were assigned, of all places, to go back home to Montgomery, Alabama, where you thought you were going to be for long enough, so long that you bought a house, but then, as so often happens with the military, things can change in a moment, right?
Yes, they told me that I was going to be there for at least another 2 years at Gunter Air Force Station in Alabama, and a month after I bought the house, I got an assignment.
To go to Illinois.
To go to Illinois, to go to Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois, which did not make a happy camper.
No. Weather wasn't good. It's cold there.
Cold, snow would be up to the eaves of the house. It would get wind chill factor up to past 50 degrees below zero in the wintertime. It was a tough assignment. But it turned out, though, Tom, to be my best assignment
Right.
in terms of career advancement.
You worked for a female general there. You were there from 78 to 81.
Yes.
You worked for a female general there.
Yes, and she took care of me. And from the standpoint that when my 2 years was up and I was ready to go, it was a 3-year assignment, but I was ready to go at 2. And I told her I was ready to go, and she went and talked to the right people, and I was able to get an assignment as a squadron commander there at Williams Air Force Base.
Which you called a plum assignment at Williams Air Force
It
Base.
was a plum assignment.
It was a busy base doing the things that you love to do.
Yes.
Besides working, besides being an engineer, playing a little golf too, right?
We had our own golf course. We did a lot of training programs on that golf course, like build a pond so that the hole wouldn't be a boring hole. You had to hit over water many times. And we did that with our training teams.
Right. Right. You started playing golf at Andrews Air Force Base. As a matter of fact, that's where he's an accomplished golfer right now, folks. I'll tell you that right now. We've only got about 3.5 minutes left, so we got to kind of move on. You were promoted to Lieutenant Colonel on time. You were hoping for an early promotion. You didn't get that, but it was followed by a quite early promotion to Colonel. Yes,
it was a surprise to me as well as to a lot of people that I was promoted 2 years ahead of my contemporary,
right,
for full colonel, and I suppose I was disappointed because I didn't make it early as lieutenant colonel. I'd worked pretty hard. There were certain things you have to do to be competitive, and one like have a master's degree, another would have all your military training courses completed, and hopefully completed near the top of your class, and so that you get that extra recognition and get your performance reports endorsed at the highest level. And that is if your supervisor agreed that's what needs to be done. And
Right.
and I had those, and but it was just one of those things that the Air Force had its time, I had mine, and they had that timeline, and that timeline was the one that we had to follow.
You were transferred to the Pentagon as chief engineer for Air Force Building and Systems, a job that you quite frankly called boring for a guy that had been in the field for most of his career. And that's when you got a call from Colonel Dan Taylor, who was in San Diego at the time, and that's when your life kind of changed right then.
Yes, they wanted me to come out and apply for that job as the physical plant director. I was not really ready to do that, and I told them that, but they convinced me to come out, and when I went there, I didn't think that I was going to get the job, but they offered me the job. Then I was in a quandary because I had to complete 3 years worth of military service to make up for my year of residency there at school at the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. However, one of my other bosses was able to get the Secretary of Air Force to give me a waiver to waiver that.
Right.
And the other thing I had to do is that I had to give up my being a full colonel and retire as a lieutenant colonel.
Right.
But
Which is a little bit of a pay change, and we've got just less than a minute left. So the rest of the story goes that you went to work at San Diego State in charge of facilities there. In 1995, you decided you needed to change the scenery. You applied for the job at A&M, and you've been here for some 15 years.
almost 15 years, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Believe it or not, we're out of time. This goes so fast, but we've just jetted through quite a life so far, some 65 years. And thank you very much for your service and for being here.
And thank you for inviting me.
All right. When Chuck Sippial made the tough decision to leave the Air Force to go to work at San Diego State in 1989, it was a choice that would eventually benefit not only A&M and its tremendous growth, but our entire community that has respected his vast volunteer work and friendship for 15 years. And now you know about his talents as he served the United States as an officer in the United States Air Force. We salute Colonel Chuck Sippial for his service to our country. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.